Oh, hi there. Normally I like making my hockey videos in the washroom so I can show off my jersey, um, or whatever props I may have. At this current time, I'm unable to do that because of some some issues I'm not going to get into. And the other reason is this video is going to be about scheduling and how I believe the Canadian hockey teams don't really have anything to gripe about as far as what teams they're going to be playing, when they're going to be on the road, how long they're going to be on the road for, and so on and so forth. I know in previous years that they've had it rather harsh, particular teams. Um, I don't know about the American teams. That's just too much information to process at this time. Maybe I'll make another video about that, but this video is going to orient towards the Canadian hockey teams and their scheduling. And that's just way too much information to do off the top of my head, making a video in the washroom. Anyway, so let's have a look. Uh, if you're unfamiliar with Canadian and American maps as far as where things are exactly, which is understandable. I mean, there's a lot of Facebook pages going, oh, well, a lot of people they can't even point out where the United States is on a map. Well, there are a lot of little parts of the United States, and not everyone knows exactly where everything is, especially if you don't travel there very often. You got a different mindset going on. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means you're ignorant on this particular subject. So anyway, if you want to understand scheduling and flight times, and all that sort of stuff that goes with it, whip out a map and Google up the schedules for whatever teams you're looking for. And this year, I've looked at them and noticed that they're not that bad. No Canadian team has a lengthy road trip. Like the worst is about 2 weeks, and I think it's Toronto that has the worst one, if I'm not mistaken. It'll take me a minute to look it up, but basically they're gone for 2 weeks and they play something like seven away games. Vancouver, just because where they're situated in the National Hockey League, they're further away than most NHL teams, and each NHL team, uh, plays home and away games. So this is all has to take into consideration. So Vancouver may have to travel further, but other teams have to travel further to get to Vancouver. Um, anyway, let's have a look at the Vancouver schedule. First four games, they're at home. They're all against Canadian teams. Um, I guess that's not much of a difference if they're home anyway. Their first away game is against Ottawa. Mi casa, si casa. Ottawa came to Vancouver. Makes sense that Vancouver goes to Ottawa to play. Their first back-to-back game is Buffalo and Boston. Now, driving distance between those two places isn't really that bad, but I'm sure they'll be on private jet and it'll be like, they'll be there in no time. They are both 4 p.m. Pacific time when they play. So basically, what that means is when they're in Boston on the 19th, maybe they get something to eat in Boston. I don't know, like a New York clam chowder or something. I don't know. Whatever the hell they eat in Boston. Um, Probably lobster bisque or something. I don't know. I don't know these things. Yeah, probably get something to eat, and then basically they're on a plane and they're on the way to Buffalo, or they're driving there. But I doubt they're driving there. They're probably flying there. And this is, somewhat of a lengthy road trip, but not really. Like the 14th, they play Calgary, and then they don't have another game until the 17th when they're on the road against Ottawa, and then their last road game in this particular segment is on the 24th against Minnesota. There is some travel, obviously, but the fact is, most of these teams, there's a day difference. So they get a chance to arrive there, situate themselves, do whatever prep work they do. I mean, I know hockey players are very superstitious people, and they have little things that they do. They like to get their training in as well, relaxation, whatever. Uh, Most of these away stints, they have that time. There's a day gap between the next game. And, you have a private jet, it really isn't that harsh on travel. I mean, if you had to travel by road, by driving, I could see it being, a bit exhausting. But these are athletes at the peak of their physical condition, most of them. I mean, injuries don't count because that's, it's a separate type of thing. Like if you got a broken foot, um, sitting your ass on a plane to fly somewhere is not that big a deal because some players play, with a fractured foot or something. So it is to be taken into consideration, but it's a different type of injury that doesn't make it harder for you to travel, especially if you're not actually doing anything. Obviously, if you're going by horseback or something like that, it would make a big difference. But if you're sitting your ass on a plane, it isn't that big a difference. So yeah, this is the October schedule for Vancouver. Again, they play a lot of home games to start off November. Well, three anyway. Then they're on the road again, playing the usual suspects: Calgary, the Anaheim Ducks, San Jose, LA, and they're back home for a couple of games. Then they're away. This is the stint where Vancouver's gone for a while, but they play teams like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New Jersey, New York Rangers, New York Islanders from the 21st to the 28th. So in 7 days, they play five teams. Wait, is that correct? Well, yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah, yeah. So that's probably the most brutal part. And then, the 30th they play Nashville. So there is some travel there. This one's a little bit harder on the Canucks, I must admit, because well, there is only one back-to-back game, and that's Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. They're not that far away. Obviously, when you sign an NHL contract, that's a big part of the deal is you have to accept that you're going to be on a plane quite often, or you're at least going to be on bus or however they do it. Sometimes they opt to drive somewhere. I bet you they do. And no, you can't just Google it. Oh, are the Canucks gonna do this, or is any NHL gonna do a road trip this way? No, the information's not available on that. They don't tell you that, and for damn good reason. Don't need some sycophantic driver deciding, well, I'm gonna stalk these guys. Um, anyway, Vancouver in January. Uh, they have another lengthy road trip. Uh, The first away game is on the 6th against Toronto, and their last away game is on the 21st against Winnipeg. Uh, None of these teams are particularly far apart. Of course, some of them are American, but there's lengthy distance between most of the games. So uh, yeah, it looks like February is a bit of a harder month. A lot of back-to-back games. But again, they're teams that are relatively close to each other. I guess the worst would be if you're home for one game against your team like Vancouver, and then you're away for another like San Jose at a similar time, and especially if it's like late at night, like they will want to get that travel done and over with. So it's basically a plane right to San Jose, right after the game out to Florida. So to be honest with you, they're probably just sleeping on the plane. Uh, doesn't sound too stressful to me. But they do play a lot of games in February, Vancouver Canucks, so that's to be considered. Um, yeah, road trip again in March, with only one home game in that stint. But most of the teams are fairly close to each other. they're all Western teams for one thing. Vegas, Chicago, St. Louis, Anaheim, LA, Arizona. April, hardly any games. Playoffs are about to start. Important stuff. And, not much other Canadian teams have it any worse. Like, the first month is usually pretty casual. Uh, well, for Edmonton, November gets a little bit harder. Um, yeah, because they play a lot of games in November. The longest stretch they go without a game in November is from the 18th to the 21st. So that's not that long a stretch. But, they train their whole lives for this, so they should be able to handle it. Things are a bit better for them in December. Um, January, 4 games at home. No, 4 games away, but all teams that are relatively close. They're all American teams, but they're relatively close to each other, so it's not a big deal. And I'm just trying to find something noteworthy here. Like the schedule, from my perspective, looks very fairly written. Um, there are back-to-back games for some teams, and sometimes they'll be home and then away the next game. But that's to be expected for any NHL franchise, and they just have to be able to deal with it. And I haven't much seen any team that's away one game and playing the next against another team, and that team being a million miles away. I'm sure there's some examples of that in this playoff, no, not playoffs, in this season schedule, but I have not seen it. Like when you're playing back-to-back games, for the example of Calgary, and one of them is against Dallas and one of them is against Colorado. Yes, that can be a bit hard, but it isn't, insurmountable. It's not like you couldn't, just deal with it. Obviously, if something traumatic happens, like one of your star players gets injured the day before, that could be a big deal when you gotta, cobble up new lines and bring up a player from the minors, and he's busy doing off his own thing in his minor league team, and all of a sudden he gets called up and he's got to rush over there. Then that could be a bit of a mess, I could see. But those are all hypothetical things. If you want to go down the path of what could happen, then there's no bounds. Anything could happen. Yeah, so Calgary's schedule, I don't think it's as good as Vancouver's, but it's not that bad, really. Um, yeah, there isn't anything noteworthy here. No lengthy road trips or anything. Ottawa, same jazz. Like, they play a lot of home games. They have a lot of big stretches where they're not playing. Their back-to-back games are teams like Anaheim and LA. You can drive comfortably from Anaheim to LA, in no time at all, and it not be stressful. Like, I don't want to hear that crap that, oh, well, we just had to play. Because, like, the other thing you have to take into consideration is if a team isn't playing, they're training. So, yes, a game, there's a lot of stress, not just the stress of actually playing the game against a team that really does want to hurt you rather than a practice game where it's your buddies. You're also playing in front of a huge crowd where, you may be in a town that particularly hates your team. Like if Pittsburgh's in Philadelphia, for example, or, vice versa, or, whatever. And all this you got to take with a pinch of salt because there's so many teams that just hate each other anyway, and there are also fan bases that hate particular organizations for very petty reasons. And although the NHL franchises themselves may not hate each other, the fans may not like the other team. Um, like there are people who are Vancouver Canuck fans who don't have anything against the Rangers as of now. Not like me, anyway. Like I cannot stand the Rangers, And, you know, a lot of people have forgotten what the 94 playoffs were like. And I've made my point saying, like, I don't like the integration between Vancouver and the New York Ranger organization, which is obviously apparent when you go to look at the things that have gone on between the two clubs since then, since the 94 playoffs. Um, anyway, yeah, I was kind of hoping there'd be some more stuff to talk about here, and it'd be nice if I were wearing my jersey, but I got to keep it low key right now. I still want to make videos the way I want to, but can't have someone etching at me. Yeah, Toronto, not particularly bad schedule. Um, like in November they play Carolina, and then they play at home against Washington, which makes sense because then they'll be on the road again next week to play Calgary and Edmonton on the 28th and the 30th. So that's not too bad. Gets a little bit harder against, well, they play against Carolina on the 19th of December, and then on the 20th, they're playing against Columbus. Now, those two places aren't too far apart, but at Carolina, they're at home. But the difference maker here is it's later in the day when they play Columbus. It's 7:30 Eastern, whereas when they're playing at home versus Carolina, it's 2 Eastern. So that does make a difference. Those few hours, it totally makes a difference. I know all about how a few hours can really make a big difference in your scheduling. And I work 9 to 5, so I know all about a shitty schedule. Um, and, you know, looking at these Canadian teams, like, they just have nothing to bitch about as far as scheduling. I mean, in previous years, obviously they do, but um, what I'm looking at right now, like, this is about as reasonable as it can get. Like, you can't ask for a better schedule than this because it just physically can't be done. Um, yeah, like almost any back-to-back game, the teams are either close to each other or it's a home game, and then the next few games are going to be away, but you know, in a different area. So it's the transition of being away, coming back home for just one game just to get yourself together, and then heading back on the road in a different direction. That makes sense. And what else am I looking at here? Okay, I'm at February for the Montreal Canadiens. Again, not too bad. 14th and 15th, they play away against Colorado and Arizona. Not far away at all, especially for an NHL team with millions of dollars at their disposal for travel. So, yeah, nothing to complain about there. I mean, you hear things like Alexander Edler puts his head down and falls asleep anyway. So, explain to me where his stress level is when he's traveling. He doesn't have any, for example. I'm sure there are other hockey players that, you know, travel's no big deal to them. And maybe if there's some, you know, whiny little wimp of a hockey player who can't handle traveling, how did he make it to the NHL in the first place? Who can't handle too much travel? I'm sure there probably is some of the players like that. I don't know offhand because as much as people like to think, you can't just Google it. Who's the whiniest, wimpiest hockey player when it comes to travel and expect to get an answer? Yeah, right. These people who think, oh, I can just Google any answer. Yeah, you can Google answers that are, you know, concrete and there's no reason for them to lie about them, like scheduling and things like that. But if you want to know if there's any honest to God truth that Sidney Crosby eats a bowl of pasta before every game, you're not going to hear that. Just use your damn common sense. There's not much nutrition in pasta. I mean, of course, you can add things to it to change that, but They would forbid him to just eat pasta before every meal. I mean, just use common damn sense. Trust me, there's somebody out there that makes Sidney Crosby eat his vegetables. I don't care how much money he makes. There's somebody out there who does that. And, a tweet of Sidney Crosby in front of a bowl of pasta is not evidence that he always eats pasta before a meal. Let me just stress this point. I didn't even want to mention him because I got a few followers that are anal retentive when it comes to anything about me saying anything about Sidney Crosby. In fact, I have no idea how long this video's been going on for. Let me check. Okay, I've been talking 20 minutes. One of my hecklers is going to notice that I mentioned Sidney Crosby for like 20 seconds. Uh, anyway, these are the Canadian teams. Nothing jumped out at me as being, particularly offensive about their schedule. Um, like obviously they have back-to-back games. All the teams do, and sometimes they're away, sometimes they're at home. When they're at home, it's not that big a deal. Obviously, be in the comfort of your own home and being able to, be in a city you're more familiar with is a good thing. But, a little bit of travel ain't too bad. There are people who go on these kind of road trips as often because they have the money to, and they're not getting paid to do it. In fact, they're spending money to do it. So any NHL player that wants to gripe and complain about scheduling when they're being paid to do this job, if you didn't want to be an NHL player and travel like that, then you're obviously in the wrong game. Should have foreseen this coming. I mean, not that I think a lot of NHL players really have that big an issue with it. They must have some working understanding of, yes, they're going to be on the road a lot. But I don't know because Google doesn't have all the answers. That's why I don't bother looking up stuff like that because you're just not going to find any information noteworthy on it. Anyway, I'm happy with Vancouver's schedule. I know in previous years they've had real shitty ones where they played 11 games. I don't know. I forget what stretch time, but 11 home away games, and that that's a bit much. Um, so strictly looking at the 2017-2018 schedule, no Canadian team has any right to complain. Anyway, if anyone has any interest at looking at their own NHL franchise and their schedule, American or Canadian, it's interesting to have a look and see what they're doing at any given time. Obviously, I couldn't make a video with me talking all this sort of stuff off the top of my head because there's just too much information here to learn. But I felt it was important to say that Canadian teams do not have a right to complain about their schedule this year. As far as American teams go, maybe a couple of them have bad schedules. I do not know. I haven't had the time to look. Anyway, I will talk to you guys later. Have a good one. See ya.